We will be out in the Fiesta Bowl in Arizona, and that's where we will find TCU and Michigan. Michigan's second straight appearance in the college football playoff. TCU, first time ever showing up in the college football playoff. So as we're breaking this game down, Bud, what really stands out to you? You can take either side, but from the matchup perspective, what do you have your eyes on? What do you think is the most interesting in the Fiesta Bowl?
Yeah, so I want to start with Michigan's offense and TCU's defense. I have a ton of respect for Joe Gillespie, the coordinator of TCU. I thought it was a really good hire by Sonny Dykes. And if you talk to anybody who coaches in the American, they like to thank Coach Dykes for removing Joe Gillespie as Tulsa's defensive coordinator and bringing him to Fort Worth because he's a really good DC. They run, if they were a pitcher in baseball, you would say they throw a lot of off speed, a lot of junk, and some different stuff that if you haven't faced it can kind of mess you up, right? If you look at what they did to Texas, I mean, they don't have a lot of special players on this TCU defense. They're well coached. They play together well. I mean, their nose guard's a true freshman, right? Who's played pretty well this year. One of their best corners is a kid in Newton they got from Louisiana Monroe. But they did a nice job of creating sort of like falsities or falsehoods in Texas's blocking scheme. And all of a sudden, Texas thought they had a lane, and then, boom, linebacker is coming free. I don't know how well that's going to work against Michigan because I think Michigan is probably the best offensive line that they have seen all year, and maybe the best offensive line they do see all year, unless they beat Michigan and they go play Georgia, and Georgia might be as good or better. Michigan is really well coached up front. I am curious as to how much TCU can confuse Michigan. Michigan center Oluwatimi, who they got as a transfer from UVA, is a really good player, and I think almost everybody on this line for Michigan is going to get drafted. So can you spit on, like, to stay with the baseball forever, can you spit on this stuff that's just falling out of the strike zone and then force TCU to kind of come, throw you pitches inside the strike zone? Can you get it blocked out enough up front? Because if you don't have confusion up front, I think Michigan can block TCU. And then that's going to go into the part of the discussion here where, okay, if one-on-one we're not able to confuse them and they're able to move us physically, can we outnumber them? And if so, what is that going to do to J.J. McCarthy? Can McCarthy play well enough, especially from the pocket? Like, can we make him play quarterback? Because this playoff doesn't feature a lot of stud quarterbacks. McCarthy might turn into one. Stroud's probably the best one you have.
Yeah.
I guess Stetson could get drafted, actually, which is possible. I mean, maybe like back half of the round.
Oh, no, I've already got him logged as a governor or senator.
No.
Duggan's a one-read guy
for the Patriots next week.
McCarthy has enough bad games, or just not bad games, just like games. It's like, okay, like is that guy going to carry you to a national title? Can he carry you to a playoff win? If TCU can do enough, and I think it's possible they actually can, by the way, because Edwards is not the same type of like vision runner as Corum was. So, like maybe they can get him seeing ghosts. Maybe they get him to bounce the ball a little earlier than Blake Corum would and not stay on his initial track. Maybe you get Michigan behind the chains a little bit. You're able to take them off their play action game some, and you force McCarthy to beat you. I think TCU on the outside can hold up against these guys. I'm just not sure if they can create enough confusion in Michigan's blocking scheme in the run game. Like, that's what I want to watch early. Is TCU have runners coming free, not running backs, runners on the defensive side coming free for these tackle for loss. Correct. Yeah. Exactly. Because if Michigan's not confused, it's all right, man. Your breaking stuff ain't working today. You're having to throw 88. I'm gonna hit that shit out of the park. I'm gonna hit that out of the park. Excuse me.
Yeah. I'm with like TCU's defense. It is a good defense. The problem is when you get to this point, to this place, the college football playoff, the other three teams have elite defenses, and a good defense usually isn't. We've seen it in times like this. When you get to the playoff, the good defense is usually ends up hurting you or killing you in the end because you don't get enough stops once you face another elite team. And I do think it'll be interesting because I have enough respect for the Horned Frogs defense to think that they can give Michigan some trouble. Problem is, once Michigan figures it out, will they have a counter? Will they be able to overpower that? Because like you said, but that's the best offensive line in the country. It's won the Joe Moore Award 2 years in a row. All 5 of those guys will probably be in the NFL. We've seen it against the Ohio State defensive front. If it was able to hold up against them, I have a feeling it will be able to hold up against TCU, because it's not like Ohio State's just playing vanilla defenses. They were bringing all sorts of crazy blitzes against them in that game, and they just really couldn't get home often enough to have enough of an impact, and they got beat over the top doing it. The question is, offensively, can TCU move the ball enough against this Michigan defense to score? I think they can. I think they will have more success than most teams have had this season. Will they have enough? I don't know, because I look at this matchup. First of all, TCU, this is just a fun stat. TCU has played in 6 one-score games this year. It's gone 5-1 in them. Obviously, the one loss was the Big 12 championship. The other 3 teams in this playoff combined have played 3 one-score games. Michigan's played 2. Georgia's played 1. Ohio State hasn't played in any. So TCU's been in more of them than any of these other teams combined. So that you could look at that as a sign of weakness, as in this team's not good enough because it's not able to pull away from others. But you can also look at the positive and say, well, this team also knows how to handle adversity. So if they jump out to a lead here and Michigan finds itself in trouble, a position that Michigan has not been in at any point this season, how does J.J. McCarthy react to that when he's in a situation out there where it's like, okay, kid, it's on you. You need to lead us on a touchdown drive right the hell now. They haven't been in a whole lot of those. They had a couple of them at the end of that Illinois game, and they did well. They drove down the field. They got the game-winning field goal with the help of an official. And then, they ended up winning the game. But they haven't really faced a ton of adversity. So I think that is going to be an interesting thing to watch in this one. But at the same time, I come back, and I think Michigan, in a lot of ways, stylistically and philosophically, is similar to the Kansas State team that gave TCU so much trouble during the regular season, because TCU beat the Wildcats in the regular season. But they got them down to their third-string quarterback before they were able to do so. Kansas State then comes back at full strength, beats them in the Big 12 championship. Michigan is a better team than Kansas State. It has more talent. It has a better offensive line. It has a better defense. So I look at those 2 games and I see how much TCU struggled in them, and it's hard for me to think the Horned Frogs can win this game. So I have to go Michigan here. I think that this is good. I think the Wolverines are going to win this game, because I think Georgia's the best team in the country. I think Michigan's the second best team in the country, and I think we are destined for a Georgia-Michigan playoff rematch.
You know who kind of reminds me a little bit of TCU in the Big Ten? Like, not as talented and not as good,
Who?
but Maryland.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, they're both good. Like, they're both sneakily good at corner. They don't have huge difference makers on the defensive interior. They do a lot with schematic confusion. Offensively, like, I don't think anybody thinks that Duggan or Talia are big time NFL guys. They do have a lot of weapons on the outside. Offensive line wise, they're okay. They're not great necessarily. It's a lot of kind of native spread stuff. And Maryland actually gave Michigan a decent bit of trouble in that ball game, And I mean, it's because I totally agree with Tom. Like, I was trying to think, or what's the flip on this? Like who has Michigan played that is similar to TCU? Nobody really runs that 3-3-5 stack that Gillespie wants to run in the Big Ten. So that it may take them a minute or two to see. And like, TCU's also kind of changed how they've played it throughout the year. Like, the way they played it against Kansas State and the way they played it against Texas is not the same stuff they were playing, in against Oklahoma State necessarily. So I don't know, like, maybe this starts kind of slow. I could see. I'm really curious to see how much play action early Michigan tries to do with JJ. Like, and I think if you could trust him enough that he'd only pull the trigger if it's really there, you do it a lot. Because you got to think TCU is going to be loading up against the run, because you cannot get game scripted out of this thing. I do not think TCU has a real ability to come from behind here, but they could play with the lead, because TCU will go for the explosive kill shot and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or does Michigan just say, hey, like, we're fine grinding this out. We're going to just run the ball 55 times and throw it 17 times. And, like, we're confident when the dust settles, we will win the ball game.
And another thing to keep an eye on too, like, all year, Michigan's been incredible in the second half of games. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if this game is kind of close for the first half. They get to the locker room at halftime. Michigan makes the adjustments it's been making all season long, and then just kind of blows the doors off them in the second half.
And TCU has 2, which is I think both these teams are really well coached. Now, part of that is certain quarterbacks maybe got hurt during the game.
Oh, come on.
Oh, man.
So in the Big 12 championship game, Kansas State sent a ton of pressure. They were like getting after Max Duggan. Does Michigan need to? Does Michigan have the personnel? The game is that something that Michigan's coaches are going to be able to maybe take a lesson from and try to apply to their approach to try to slow Max Duggan in this offense?
I wouldn't be surprised if we see Michigan a little more active as far as that's concerned, because that's one thing. Like defensively, they've still been very good. But what they've been best at is just not letting you finish drives, because they lost Aiden Hutchinson, they lost Ajabo from last year's team, and the pass rush, while it has been admirable, has not been nearly to the same level of the Michigan team we saw last year. But where they have been much better is, like I said, when teams get into scoring range, they get shut down. Like if you're happy at some point just to get away with a field goal, because that seems to really be the only thing Michigan's willing to allow at that point. So that, I think, is something I don't know if you're going to see them bring a ton of blitzes, because I think that's just not really what they do. They blitz some, but maybe. I mean,
they've got good defensive linemen who will get sacks and tackles for loss because they're winning battles against the offensive line. But schematically, it doesn't seem like they're dialing up a bunch of pressure as intentionally as maybe you could.
Yeah, from what I've seen of Minter, I think that he's going to be more concerned about TCU's explosive play potential, and he's going to look to limit that. I mean, that's what he did against Ohio State. It's what he did against Penn State. I think that's probably what they end up doing in this game. Try to make TCU hit a bunch of singles instead of home runs. That's
what I think too. I mean, look, Duggan is a player I love watching, but he's a very college-y quarterback, right? I mean, like he's not somebody who's good at going through progressions at all. Like they of all the quarterbacks in this playoff, he's the guy you have to scheme it up for the most, probably. And you could probably argue that Michigan should scheme it up more, like for McCarthy a little more than they do. They seem to throw a lot of offense on him, although they don't actually throw the ball that often. So maybe that's their limiting factor there. But Michigan runs a very NFL style defense. Morris, I think up front, is capable of getting pressure for them. I think Mozzie Smith should do a good job for them in terms of compressing the pocket. And it wouldn't shock me if they blitz him some, because like Saints drill, their nickel guy is actually a pretty damn good cover dude. The number of screens that TCU runs, though, is interesting to me. And I wonder if they're going to be a little hesitant to blitz as much, because TCU is so big play reliant. If you blitz that much, as you saw Michigan's offense do against Ohio State's defense, there is a chance that you pop these big plays. TCU is not a team that is a high success rate team. They do not put drives together very well at all. I'm going to ask them to play left-handed, and left-handed for them is sustaining drives.
And shout out to the Eye on College Basketball podcast, Matt and Gary. They're the absolute best in that space. So I'm not going to do a whole trivia time, but this is a question. 16 college football playoff semifinals have been held since the format was introduced. Do you know how many have been decided by single digits?
Oh, 5 at most.
But you got to guess?
3.
Yeah, okay.
13 of 16 college football playoff semifinals have been decided by 10 points or more, and 9 of them have been decided by 20 points or more. These games are not that close. It's fascinating. And so and by the way, favorites in the college football playoff in the last 5 years, 7-3 against the spread, 9-1 straight up.
You almost get the sense that with so many blowouts in the semis, you really only need 2 teams in a playoff.
So with that as context, or maybe you're going against it, best bets for the Fiesta Bowl. What do we like? Tom, you already said you think Michigan wins. Probably take Michigan to cover.
Yeah, I like TCU. TCU is a very good team. TCU deserves to be here, but we make no bones of the fact that of the 4 teams in this playoff, TCU is I hate using the word weakest in this situation, but it is the weakest of the 4. I think if either of these 2 games have blowout potential, this is the one with the biggest blowout potential. So I'm taking Michigan.
Just from a pure power rating standpoint, Michigan A game is probably a 30, right? TCU's A game is probably still like a 22, 23, maybe a 24. So I think if you assume you get the A game for both, I think you got to take Michigan.
Total?
Over. I think
Over?
Michigan. I don't think Michigan gets stopped very often.
Michigan's been so like ruthlessly efficient all year. They're just mean about it. I've just got images of like Olu Oluwatimi getting to the second level and just like putting a TCU linebacker into the ground. I'm Michigan.
I'm not playing anything on the total, but if I had to, I'd probably play under.
Yeah.
I mean, just game script wise, if you like Michigan, I think you assume that they don't get down early. They're able to run the ball, lean on it late. They'll play slow. Takes away some of the play action stuff that TCU wants to do. I tend to lean under.